Hello everyone and welcome back to the web penetration testing. Now, in the previous videos we covered some of the less common attacks, including the session fixation, hijacking a session, and basically the brute force attack as well. Now, the brute force attack will work in any case. You can always try it. It's not 100% possibility that you will get into someone's account, but it will always work. Now, here is where the real attacks start, and by real I mean the most common attacks, which is the attacks based on injection. So we will be covering some of the exploitations based on injections, such as the SQL injection, the NoSQL injection, the XML injection, and the command injection. Now, after all of that, we will also cover the cross-site scripting attack. Those are some of the attacks that you will actually encounter on the internet, on the websites. Most commonly, I believe that you will encounter the SQL injection attack, which is the attack on the database. But before we begin with these attacks, let me just log in first. So, root test 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, the idea behind these attacks based on injection is the interactive web applications that require the user input. Now, they're all very similar, since the vulnerability is actually the code itself of the website, where you have the user input not filtered well enough. So if we have a user input where, for example, on some website where we search the online shop for some of the tools we need, basically if you type there the part of the code, it might actually interpret, the website might actually interpret that user input as a part of their code if it's not filtered enough. Now, by filtered I mean it is excluding some of the characters used in, for example, SQL queries, in JavaScript code, and so on and so on. Now, we will start off with the command injection, and we will need also to start our, let me just find it, OWASP virtual machine. So, if you have it started already, good. Let me just start mine. While that is doing, let me just check one thing. And that thing is, if we are connected to the internet, we should be, yeah, .1.5, .1.5, good. So let's start off with some of the basic injection types. The first one, as I said, that we will be doing will be the command injection. Now, the command injection, let's say, for example, this example we will practically cover in the next lecture, but let's say you have a website that is used for anyone to ping their own machines. So you have a website, you put in the user input your IP address, and the website will perform ping and then the IP address or the domain name. So as we can see, this command ping google.com is executed by the operating system on this machine. Now, if you have a website that performs this same exact command, the command is also executing on the operating system of that server's machine, which means that our user input, which was the IP address of the machine we wanted to ping on that certain website, was processed into the command of the server in its own terminal. Now, that can be dangerous if, for example, the input, which was the IP address, isn't filtered enough, and we can type basically any command and execute it in the server's terminal. The next attack would be the SQL injection, and the NoSQL injection. That is basically the attack on the database itself. Now, it is also happening when the user is not filtered enough. It basically allows us to query the database and possibly find something very useful, such as a bunch of usernames and passwords. It also could potentially allow us to delete the entire database if we wanted to. Also, the next thing would be the XML injection, which basically is attacking the XML itself, and also at the end we will cover the cross-site scripting attack, which is basically the attack where we cover injecting JavaScript code into a web page. So let me just check if our machine is on. If it is, I will log in, and then I will continue into the next tutorial where we will start off with the command injection. So that's about it for this tutorial. I just gave you a brief view of the injection attacks, and we will cover each one of them in details in the next lectures. So I hope I see you there, and take care. Bye. Welcome back everybody, and let us start off with the command injection. Now in the previous video I told you a little bit about the command injection, but let us actually get the practical method of using that attack. So the command injection, well, as I said, some web applications can use parts of their operating system to do something. As I gave the example, for example, pinging. Now usually the command injection itself will run the command on the same server, but depending on the architecture of the server itself, it can also execute the command on another server as well. Now what I mean by that is, let's say the same example as before, which is the pinging the machine. So you go to the website which basically pings the machine. Let me just actually try to find that website. So I will turn the burp suit on. I will open another terminal for me, and let us actually try to find the legit website that pings another machine or another website. I believe there are lots of them online, so we will just find one of them. So let me just turn on the burp suit, and while this is turning on, let me enlarge this terminal. Okay, so this is, let us just turn off the intercept. And once we turn off the intercept, let us go to the Firefox. So let us just try to search for the simple pinging website. Maybe that will work, maybe it won't. I just want to show you that those websites do exist. Now our Firefox is a little bit slow because of the burp suit, so let us just wait for it for a few seconds. Or maybe it's better, free ping test tool, ping your server or website. So we just click on the first link and let us see what kind of website this is. As we can see, here is the web server name. So this is the type of website I was talking about. So basically here you just put your web server name and it will ping your server in order to check if it is online or not. Now what I was talking is that if, for example, this website was vulnerable to the command injection, we could possibly run any command that we can run in our own terminal also right here, and it will process the command in the server's terminal. But also it can send the command to another server, and we could actually execute this command to another server as well. So let us start off with the website that we can actually test. You shouldn't be testing any of these websites you do not own. So even if this one is vulnerable, which I doubt since it was first and probably one of the most famous ones, it probably isn't vulnerable to the command injection. But we will use a website that is vulnerable to the command injection. So actually I don't know why I closed Firefox. We need to go visit our virtual machine, which is our OWASP machine. Let me just check the IP address of it. Should be .1.9, no, it's .6, okay. And let us go 192.168.1.6. Now once you are here, what you want to do is go to the damn vulnerable web application. I believe we didn't go here before, so just click on this. Now what this will ask you is the username and password. Now you can just type here the username and password, which is admin, but let us actually try to practice some of the one of the attacks that we covered before. And one of those attacks is the Hydra. So let us actually brute force this login page. It is a good practice as we did cover this before. So what we want to do is open our terminal, and we will do it fast. I won't cover any of the any of the syntax, since I covered it in previous videos. You can check that out if you want to. What we basically want to do is type Hydra, and the syntax is similar, so as in the previous videos. So we type the IP address, we are posting the form, so HTTP form post. Oops. Now before I type this, actually let me just show you, I do have the same files as before, which is the users.txt and passwords.txt, so we'll use the same lists as in the previous videos. So let us start again. We type here the IP address, then the post form, so HTTP form post, and then we specify the link. Now in order for us to check out the link, let us go right here, and we can see that the link, the path is dva login.php. So let us copy that and let us paste it right here. So once we do that, we want to specify the username and password, and we want to say to click on the submit button, and we want to specify a string that it will give for every incorrect login. Now in order for us to see what string it would give, let us just type here something random and see what it gives us as an error. So it gives us login failed. So we will use this string in order to specify the correct from the incorrect login credentials. So now what we want to do is inspect element. So let us inspect the element in order to find out the name of the username and the name of the password login form. Now what I mean by that, let me just show you. As we can see, form action login.php method post. We click here on arrow down, field sets, in order to find out, and here we can see a label for username. The name for username, the name for this field is username, which is most likely always going to be something like that, or user or something like that. So we cover this, and we divide these two with the two dots. So we type here username equals the upper arrow, then user, the upper another arrow, this sign. Let me make this larger so you can see the entire command. Okay, so then after that we want to see what is the name of the password field, which is probably going to be the password name password. So the name of the password field is password, so we specify right here password equals, again, upper arrow, pass, upper arrow, and then we want to specify the login button, which is called login, as we can see right here. So as we can see the submit, we should type here submit equals login, or login equals submit, since the name of the button itself is login and the action is submit. So let us just type that, login equals submit, and then we specify another two dots, which means to divide these sections, and we specify the string that we get once we provide a wrong username and password, which is login failed. So let us just copy this, paste it right here, close our apostrophe, and then specify the list, and the list of usernames and the list of passwords. So capital L users.txt and then capital P passwords.txt, and let this run. It should find the password and username, which is admin. Let us just see right here, and as we can see, it finished and it found one way available username and one available password. Now if you wanted to, you could just type here and skip this part. It is good always to have a good practice of something that you learned in the previous videos. So we do not want to save this. Let us just close this, and once we are here, what we want to do is we want to go to the command execution part. So click on the command execution part, and you will see the similar website as the one we visited before, which is the ping for free. So basically you just type here, as it says, the IP address, and it will ping it. Now we can try it. Let us ping my router, since it is online, of course. I wouldn't be able to access the internet if it wasn't, and we can see the pinging results. So it performed 3 ping scans, and we can see that it received 3 packets. So that's good. But let's say, for example, you think that this is vulnerable possibly for the command execution, and you try a simple command, which is 192.168.1.1, where we specify our router IP address, and we type here the, let me just find where is it on my keyboard, the dot and the comma in order to divide these 2 commands, and we type here, for example, who am I? And we did cover this command. It will give the account on the terminal on this web server if it is vulnerable to the command execution. So we submit that, and we can see that it executed the ping scan, and it also gave us the output who is running on that server, which basically tells us that this server is vulnerable to the command injection. We were able to execute the command on the server that isn't only the pinging command. Now we will continue. I will continue to show you how to actually exploit this. Now, for now on, we just ran a simple command in order to find out whether it's vulnerable or not, and in the next video I will show you how to exploit this and make that server connect to our own machine. So that's about it for this lecture. We will continue in the next one, and I hope I see you there. Bye! Hello everybody, welcome back, and let us continue with exploiting our command execution vulnerability. So in the previous video we basically tried out this web server by typing in our IP address and then typing in another command to see if it will execute it. Now you divide 2 terminal commands with dot and comma. I can show you that it works in your terminal as well. So if you type here ifconfig and then dot comma and then who am I, it will basically print out the ifconfig output, and also it will print the who am I output. So you can do a bunch of the commands like that. So ifconfig who am I ls, and it will print out all of these commands with their output, as we can see. So now that we know that, we need to find the best way to use this vulnerability in order for us to gain access to that machine. So let us try out to see, for example, if we type here 192.168.1.1 and then for example uname -a, let's see if it will execute that, and as we can see, it does execute it. It gives us the version of Linux and the name, as we can see, OSBWA. Now that we know that, we can certainly do better than this, than just gathering information command by command. We can actually try to make a connection with this machine to our own machine. Now, in order for us to do that, we will use a tool called netcat. Now, netcat is basically, let me just clear the screen. With netcat, we can actually connect to another PC with just 2 simple commands, which for our own PC we need to set up the listening port, and that listening port for our example will be 12345. Now on the listening port we will listen for the intercoming connection from any PC, and in this case that PC will be our vulnerable OS virtual machine, since we will run the command in its own terminal, since it is vulnerable to the command execution. So here we want to type here this command nc and then -lvp12345. Now if you want to check out, before running that, if you want to check out some of the options, let me just see what is the syntax here. You can see what LVP stands for, and you can see also some of the other options here. As we can see, -L stands for listen mode for inbound connections. We will use that. -V stands for verbose. Use twice to be more verbose. We also use that. And -P, let me just find it, is port. So we specify the port to be 12345. You can specify any port as long as it is not in use. So, but in this case I will use NC -LVP for listen, verbose and port number 12345. Now if you run this, it will say listening on any 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This any means on any interface, on any networking interface. So once we receive the connection, we will be able to execute commands to the virtual machine from here, to the victim machine from here. So let us just open up our Firefox. And now what we want to do is make this machine connect to our Kali Linux machine. We can do that, so we can simply type 192.168.1.1, so it performs the pinging of that machine, and then we put the dot and comma in order to run our next command, which will be nc traditional, nc dot, and then traditional, and then -e, and then we want to go to the bin bash folder in the victim machine, and after that we want to specify the IP address of our Kali Linux machine. So this will basically mean the to which machine should it connect, and we want it to connect to our Kali Linux machine. Now in order for me to check that, let me just type here ifconfig so I don't specify wrong port. So we want to connect to this port from the victim machine, to this IP address from the victim machine. So we type here our Kali Linux IP address, and then we type the port that we are listening on, which is 12345 in my case. And if you specified any other port, just type here that port after the IP address of the Kali Linux machine. Now what this command will do is, first of all, it will ping our router, and then it will execute the next command, which is netcat, and it will connect to our Kali Linux machine on this port. And this bin bash basically allows us to execute commands on that machine. So if we type here submit, you will notice that it basically will just ping. I believe it won't give any output right here. Or maybe it will just stay here loading. Let us check that out. Yeah, it will probably stay here loading. But if we open our terminal, you can see connect to 192.168.1.5, which is us, from 192.168.6. We can see that someone has connected to our listening port. And that is basically it. It won't say anything, it will just give you this output, and it will wait for something. Now what it waits for is the command. So if we type here who am I, who am I, you will see that we get the output www minus data. Type here the uname minus I. We can see that we are currently running commands on the Linux system. On our victim system, we made a reverse connection. We made it connect to our own Kali Linux machine, which basically means we exploited it, since now we can type here ls in order to see files. We can change directory and type ls here again, and we can see all of the files on that machine. We can also check the IP address, so you can see that it really is that machine. So if you type here sbin and then /ifconfig, it will say that the IP address is 192.168.1.6, which is the IP address of our victim machine. And I will show you that, as if I type right here ifconfig, you can see that the IP addresses do match 192.168.6 and 192.168.1.6. So that's about it for this exploitation of the command injection. You can basically now navigate your way and then try to find something useful if this was a real machine, but since this is purposely made vulnerable machine, I won't be actually trying to find something right here, since I know there really isn't anything special. And in the next lecture I will show you how you can actually do the same thing but on the blind command injection. Now I will explain what blind command injection is in the next tutorial, and I hope I see you there. Bye! Hello everybody and welcome back. Now let us just perform the blind command injection, or should I say, let me show you how to find out if a certain website is vulnerable to the blind command injection instead of just the command injection. So now what I mean by blind command injection is basically, as you can see, if we go right here to the website once again, so let me just, it says that there is an error. To display, Firefox must send information that will repeat any action such as research. Resend. whatever, I'm not really sure what's the problem. I basically just started recording. Let us just connect once again to the machine. So 192.168.1.6 I believe it was. And let us go to the damn vulnerable web application once again. Come on, will you connect? So let's just let this connect, and let me just explain you. The blind command injection is basically when you can't really see the output of your command. So in our previous example, we actually could be able to see the output of the ping command and also the output of the command that we specified after the pinging command. Now, in some cases you won't be able to see the output. It will basically maybe just print you your server was pinged correctly or something like that, and even if it is vulnerable to the command execution, it might not show it in the output. So the best way to do that is by pinging your own machine from that server, and then opening and inspecting the packets in the Wireshark in order to see if it pinged correctly. Now I'll show you what I mean. Let me just see why this isn't connecting. Let's see if we are... maybe it's because we are still on the virtual machine. So in order to exit that virtual machine, just click here exit, and you basically stop the connection to the victim machine. Now let me just ping our router to see if we are on the internet, and we are. So the problem is not with this machine, the problem is with the victim machine. But as we can see, it loaded. So let's go to the command execution once again. And let's pretend that once you type here 192.168.1.1, it doesn't give you any output. Now here it will give you, since we do not have an example of blind command injection right here. But let's pretend it didn't give us any output and it pinged our router. Now, in order to check if this is vulnerable to the blind command execution, the most common method would be to ping two machines. So 192.168.1.1, which is a legit command, and it is made, and this server is made to ping one IP address. But if we specify another IP address in the next command, so ping, and then the IP address of our Kali Linux machine, the server that isn't vulnerable shouldn't be executing this command. It should only execute this command. But if it is vulnerable, it will execute both of these commands. Now be careful, since this is our OS machine is Linux machine, and if you just run this command, it will ping your machine forever. So you will just basically have to restart it in order to start pinging. So just type here -C, which stands for count, and 3. So this basically means it will only send 3 pinging packets, as in this output right here. So let me just show you. If we open our terminal and ping 192.168.1.1, it will ping forever until we stop this program. But if you type here ping 192.168.1.1 -C3, it will only ping it 3 times, and it will stop. Now we want to run that on the target server, so we don't ping ourselves forever. But before we run that, we will need to run a tool called Wireshark. So just type in your terminal Wireshark. The Wireshark is basically a tool that allows us to inspect our packets on a certain network interface. Now, as soon as you open it, you will see a bunch of packets flowing. Just click here. If you get this error, click here on OK. And let me just see, my interface is ETH0, and once you open it, you should be seeing some packets right here. I'm not really sure why I don't see them. Let's just try by... Why doesn't this want to move? Wait, what are you doing? Okay. And here we can see the one packet. Why is there not other packets? So let me just try to ping 192.168.1.1. Oh yes, this is the terminal that I ran my Wireshark in, so this won't work. Let us just open another terminal and try to ping 192.168.1.1. And here we can see a bunch of ICMP packets flowing around, so that is good. This is the pinging packet, as we can see, echo ping request and echo ping reply from our router. Now that you opened this and went on to your network interface, which for me was THEO, now you want to execute this command and basically click here submit. And once this is finished, you won't see this output that we see since it is blind, but you will be able to see if someone pinged you in Wireshark. Now let's stop it. So you just stop the capturing packets on this red button right here, and you can then inspect all of the packets that you received in that certain amount of time. Now these first ping requests are something we ran on our terminal and we pinged our router, but we can find out that that website or the OS machine is vulnerable to command execution by these ping requests right here. So as we can see, there are 3 ping requests as we specified in this server with the -C3 command, and we got the reply from the OS virtual machine, which IP address is 192.168.1.6. So that means if you got this ICMP packet right here, that means that the website is vulnerable to the command injection. Now, another thing you might need is, for example, if you have a bunch of packets flowing around, there's a lot of them, you can filter it out by typing ICMP right here, and you will only see the pinging packets. Let me just, as we can see, first 4 packets are basically the packets that we use to ping our router, and this is the output from our command injection. So by this we know that the machine is vulnerable, and we can proceed with the same process as in the previous video in order for that vulnerable machine to connect to our own machine. Now I just wanted to show you that in the command injection you will most likely have the visible ones, since it must give some kind of the output. But before I finish with the command injection, I just want to tell you a few things, which is the command injection. First of all, it can be done both over GET and POST requests. The example that we had right here was the POST request, I believe. Let me just check right here. Let me just check it right here by typing in the IP address of our router and then intercepting the packet. I believe this is a POST request open. So here we have, and we can see right here, yes, it is a POST request. So this was an example of POST request command execution. You can also have it as a GET request. And also, with GET request, the user input will be sent within the link. So that's how you can differentiate the POST from the GET request. If this was a GET request, we will have this IP address that I typed here somewhere in the link right here. But since this is a POST request, we do not have it. Now, as we saw in the POST request, the IP address was sent within the HTTP body, as we can see right here. Here it is. And there are also some of the other values in HTTP headers that can be potential threat to the command injection. Now, some of them are, for example, cookies, user agent, as we can see this right here. Refer can also be sometimes vulnerable to the command injection. And also, as we saw, the command injection can be either visible or invisible. We covered both of those, both visible and both invisible, and I want to show you another very famous command injection vulnerability, which is called shell shock. Now, shell shock, if you were to boot your OS virtual machine into live version, it would print out the current uptime of the server, which means it executed something similar to the uname -a command. So we will not cover that right now, since it is very similar to these two attacks, but if you were to boot this machine into the live version, you would see, once you visit the IP address of that machine, it will print out the uptime of that machine. For example, the machine is running for 3 hours. Now, that means that it executed some kind of a command in the terminal in order to show us that option, which means it could be potentially vulnerable to the command injection. But if you want to check out the shell shock, you can search on it on the internet and read more about it. And you can also, if you're familiar with the MSF console, you can also use its module in the MSF in Metasploit framework. I believe it is called something like exploit HTTP Apache mode. I'm not really sure. Let me just check out right here once the MSF console opens up. That will show you. Now, we didn't cover the Metasploit yet, but just follow up with what I'm doing right now. It shouldn't be that hard to do so. As we will not be exploiting, I will just show you some of the options that Shellshock has, or this module in Metasploit. So we want to use exploit multi HTTP, I believe, and then Apache mode, and then I just tabbed to complete this. So once you use that, you can type here show options, and it will give you some of the options that you need to specify in order to use this vulnerability. As we can see, the vulnerability is CVE 2014-6271. Now, as I told you, the part of the header that it is attacking is the user agent part, so it will send the... Let me just close Wireshark since we don't need it anymore. It will send the vulnerability command, the vulnerable command, to the user agent field in the HTTP header. The method that this uses is get method. We need to specify the rhosts, which is the victim machine, which is in our case our OS machine. You also need to specify the target URI, and you do that by basically just going to the target's IP address once it is booted into live mode. And after you do that, you can also set the target, and you can just type here exploit, and it should run. Now, I didn't specify anything, so this won't run for me. I will just close it right here and close the Metasploit. I just wanted to show you that that exists as well. And that would be basically about all about the command injection. And in the next videos, we will start off with the SQL injection, which is the #1 vulnerability on websites. And if you encounter something, it will probably be the SQL injection. It is very dangerous and very common, especially in the smaller websites, as they do not filter their user input that well. And we will do that, and I will show you all of the practical ways to attack that in the next few lectures. And I hope I see you there, and take care. Bye. Hello everybody, and welcome back to the next tutorial in web penetration testing. Right now we will start off by covering some of the basics of SQL and the basics of SQL injection. So first of all, for those of you who don't know, with the SQL injection we basically make an interaction with the database itself. Now, the database is mostly used to store information. For example, usernames and passwords can be stored in database, and once you type them in a form, the server queries the database and compares password you typed in with the password stored in the database, and if they match, it will allow you to log in. So the example would be, for any login form that you encounter, whether it is on the Instagram, Twitter, or any social media account, what it will do is once you type it in, it will make a query to the SQL database, and it will compare, first of all, it will probably hash your password and compare the hash password with the hash password stored in the database, and if they match, you will be able to log in. So, the problem here happens if the person who created that website didn't filter the user input well enough and didn't forbid some of the characters used to query the database. Now, it can potentially allow the user to send SQL queries and gather a bunch of the information that he shouldn't really gather. It can also allow the user to delete the entire database if he wanted to. Now, before we begin, let me just open LeafPad right here, and explain a little bit more what SQL is and how you query the database. First of all, the database is just a bunch of tables that are connected with the same system and that are also connected between each other. Now, table, what I mean by tables is basically table is a list that contains information for the same type of elements, for example, table of users. So you have Facebook.com, for example, and it probably has a database with a bunch of tables of users. And the tables are basically consisted of rows and columns. So, for example, you could have the row of user, then below row of password for user, then below row of some of the other information for user, mobile phone, email, or basically any other information you want. It doesn't have to be anything linked with the user itself. It could be, for example, you visit an online shop and it sells I don't know, flowers, for example, and you could have a table of different types of flowers right there, and different types of information for those flowers. And once you search the online shop, it queries for that database. Now, how do we query a database? How do we actually interact with the database itself? Now, there is the SQL language. It is not that hard to learn, but in the SQL injection, it might seem a little tricky to get used to it, but once you learn some of the basic commands, it is not that hard to continue learning it. Now, some of the top commands would be create, select, update, insert, delete, drop. Now, these commands are used to query the database, and they basically do as they say. Create will create database, select will select a specific, for example, table in that database, or specific column or row, it doesn't matter. Update will basically update the database. Insert will insert a new element to the database or to the table itself. And delete will delete a certain part of the database. For example, you want to delete a user. He decided to, for example, close the account, and you want to delete it from the database. You will do it with the delete command. And drop basically deletes the entire database itself. It can be very dangerous if the site is vulnerable to the SQL injection. So, for example, let's say the Facebook was vulnerable to the SQL injection, and you just type there drop and the name of the database, you would basically delete the entire database of users and passwords, which would become a really big problem. But luckily, Facebook is not vulnerable to the SQL injection, and most of the bigger websites aren't vulnerable to the SQL injection, but some of the less known websites could be. So, also, one more thing, the commands delete and drop are not really used that much by the attackers, since loss of information is not the preferred method of the attack itself, since attacker in most cases wants to gather information and not delete them. Now, put yourself in the shoes of the attacker. Valuable to the attacker is the passwords and usernames that he could gather for that account, then deleting every account. If he deleted every account, he would just make a big problem, but if he gathered all usernames and passwords, he could basically log in as anybody to that website. And that could prevent a huge problem if that website was, for example, PayPal. He could send a bunch of money to himself, and he would probably get caught after some time, but that isn't the point right here. Now, the command out of all of these that you will use always is the select command. So this command is used to query the database. So, for example, you found out the SQL injection, you want to select the table with the passwords. You would do that with this command. Now, the basic SQL query will look something like this. So, select, and then some kind of elements from table where condition. So this is the basic query for the SQL database. We select some elements from some table where and then a certain condition. Now the type of that, the example for this command would be something like this. Let's say select name, description, price from products where price is less than $5.99. For example, now this is the basic query database for a website that would possibly be some kind of the online shop. So we select the name of the product that we are searching for, the description of that name, and the price of that name from all of the products where price is less than $5.99. And then once the user selects that somewhere, the server prints out back all of the responses that are below $5.99 and that have name, description, and price with them. So it doesn't have to be a single thing that we specify right here. We can specify two things. So for example, you could just type select for column A. So we want to select column A from table X, where some other column E equals employee, and column F basically equals 100. Now, as you can see, you can also use these logical conditions, which basically allows us to set two things right here. So we select column A from table X, where column E equals employee and column F equals 100. So this is how the basic SQL query looks like. Now you might find it a little bit tricky, but you should be able to understand it. If you don't, however, just search on the internet some of the SQL basics and you will get used to it real fast. It is one of the easier languages, but its syntax can be a little bit weird. As we can see right here, this select from and where is typed in. I typed it in capital letters. You don't have to if you don't want to. I just wanted to type it in capital so I can show you the different parts of it. So this column A is the part of the database, this table X is part of the database, the column E is also part of the database. That's why I typed it in the lower letters, and the select from and where and end are basically conditions that we use to query the database. Now that I show you some of the basics of the SQL, I just want to let us just continue in the next lecture with the exploitation and the attack of the SQL injection on our OWASP virtual machine. So this was about it for this lecture. As I said, if you want to, just check out on the internet about SQL more, and I will see you in the next video where we will be attacking our first target. So I hope I see you there, and take care. Hello everybody and welcome back, and now let us start off by trying to exploit our first target, which would be our OWASP virtual machine. So I will just close this, which was from the previous video. We do not want to save it. Let us just go onto our virtual machine and also go to once again to the damn vulnerable web application, which is DVWA. Once you get there, if it asks you for the login screen, just type there admin and it will open up this window. From there, you just go to the SQL injection right here. So, as in the previous command injection tutorials, SQL can also be used to query with the get method. So, if you have a source code to the website, you can easily see if it is vulnerable to the SQL injection, but in most cases you won't have the source code. Right here we do have it, as we can see if we click right here on the view source. You will see the source code of this website, and we can see our SQL query, which is right here. So we will get to this a little bit later on. For now on, let us just see what this website is all about. So as we can see, we get prompted with the user ID. So user ID could possibly be some kind of a number, so let us just type here 1 and submit it, and we will get the first name and the last name or surname for the user ID under the number 1. If we type here user ID 2, we will get the user ID under the number 2. So that would be Gordon Brown. So we can conclude that this website is basically giving the first and last name based on the user ID that you typed right here. Now let's try here 32, for example. There probably isn't, so as we saw, if you type here 32, it won't give out any output since there isn't a user under the ID of 32 or 33. I don't know what I typed, I forgot, it doesn't really matter. So let us continue. Now, it all seems good for now, but what happens if we type here a special character that is used in programming languages, for example? Now, we can cheat right here and type and view the source code, but the basic check, the most basic check for the SQL injection is always the apostrophe, a single apostrophe. Now, in most cases, once you type this, it will, if the server is vulnerable to the SQL injection, it will print out an error. It will say that there was an error in the SQL query. And let us just check that out. If I click here on submit, you will see we get some weird error that says you have an error in your SQL syntax. Check the manual that corresponds to your MySQL server version for the right syntax to use near this at line 1. Now, if you see this on any website, it means it is vulnerable to the SQL injection, because this error means that we actually entered something that messed up with the server's code. And it even says it right here that we have an error in SQL syntax. Now, that error basically is the 3 apostrophe one next to another. So, in order to explain that a little bit better, let me just go here and on view source, let me enlarge this, we can see that this is our SQL syntax. We can see that basically, as I explained in the previous video, it selects first name and last name from users where user ID equals, and then here it types any input that we typed in the user ID form. So for example, if we type there 2, it would print out 2, the information about user under ID 2. And you can see that the ID has the apostrophe from the left side and apostrophe from the right side, which means that the user input is anything between these two apostrophes, which is good. But what happened when we typed another apostrophe? It happened that this basically, let me just show you, let me copy the entire command, let us copy it, and let us open a leafpad. So I already had it open, so I will just open once again and paste the command right here. When we typed user under ID 2, it looked like this. When we typed user ID 1, it looked like this. But once we typed the apostrophe, we had these 3 apostrophes, and it counted first 2 as the part of the query, and the last one was basically SQL didn't know how to interpret the last apostrophe, and it gave us an error. An error in syntax in SQL language, which means that it actually read our apostrophe as a part of the code. And that's how we know that it is vulnerable to the SQL injection. So, let me just open this. Now, and most of the time you won't have this code, but you can actually try to guess how the code might look like based on the website itself. So we could actually guess, once we type here 2, we know that it queries for the first name and the last name from some table with users where ID equals 2. Now that we know that it is vulnerable, we can actually try a few of other things. So let us try to actually type here 2 and add the apostrophe, which would end the first, which would be the correspondent to the first apostrophe in the source code. So let us keep the source code right here, So for now on, it is select first name, last name from users where user ID equals 1 apostrophe, 2, then second apostrophe, and then we can check right here, for example, and, which is a SQL syntax, and 1 equals 1. Now, let me just delete the last apostrophe since we already have it specified in the source code. What this does is basically it will check for a condition if 1 equals 1, which is always true, and it shouldn't give us any error. If you just paste this in the instead of the ID, you will see that it is a good written syntax for the SQL, and it shouldn't give us an error. It will print out the ID of username 2, and it will not print anything else. So if we just type here submit, you can see that it just printed the Gordon Brown, which is the username under ID 2, and it also checked if 1 equals 1, and since that is true, it didn't give us any error. But let's do the same thing, and instead of 1 equals 1, we type here 1 equals 2. Now, since this is not correct, 1 is not equal to, it will not print out anything. So basically it won't print out the Gordon Brown or anything else. If you click here submit, you will see that it doesn't give us any information, since it would only print out the username under ID 2 if the second condition was also met, which it wasn't, since 1 is never equal to 2. Now you might be asking, let me just type here, why am I not using the apostrophe at the beginning and at the end? Well, basically I already have those two apostrophes in the source code. As you can see right here, it starts off with the apostrophe, and then we just type here 2, and then the second apostrophe and 1 apostrophe, then 1 second apostrophe equals, and then another opening apostrophe 1, and we have the closing one right here, so we do not have to type it. If we were to type it, we would get another syntax error, since we have another apostrophe which shouldn't be there, as we can see right here. We have a few extra apostrophes, so we do not type the apostrophe at the end. Now that we saw how this works, let us actually try to find out how many rows and columns and tables and all of that kind of stuff are there, in order for us to get to the valuable stuff, which would be usernames and passwords. So in order for us to find out the existing number of columns, we should type here this command. So we delete basically anything, or let's just delete all. So we type here 2 apostrophe, and then we use the command order by, and then we type here 1. Now what this means is this will try to find the existing number of columns. This order by 1 will basically see if there is one column, and we will just go 1 order by 1, order by 2, order by 3, and once it doesn't give us anything, it means that there is not a column under that number. Now after this, what we want to do is type here hashtag. Now you might be asking, why are we typing the hashtag now? Well, basically hashtag is the comment in the SQL language. So anything that comes after the hashtag is interpreted as a comment. So we type here hashtag and then apostrophe, and if we type right here, we can see that the column 1 exists. Now let us try to see if there are 2 columns, for example. So we type here the same command, but instead of 1 we want to check out 2. Does that exist as well? And it does. And let us try to find out about the third column. Does the third column exist in the database? And if we type right here, it will say unknown column 3 in order clause, which means our database only has 2 columns for now. Third one doesn't exist, and that's why we get this error. Now that we found out how many columns are there, we can basically try to select them both and see what they are. We want to see, for example, in which order are these columns, and we do that with this SQL query, which is to, and basically maybe I didn't mention, but this to is the ID for the Gordon Brown, I believe, guy, and we use that so we can specify another command after that, so it gives us our desired output. So we will use union select 1 and then comma 2 and then hashtag apostrophe. Basically this will give us in which order are these columns, these two columns that we found out. If we, for example, found out that there were 3 columns right here, we would just type here another comma and then 3. But since we only have 2, we just type here 1 comma 2, and we can see right here that the first name is the column number 1 and the surname is column number 2. Now this union command right here that we used, basically it is used to gather results from 2 queries, as we can see right here. So we will continue. We basically just found out some of the basic things right here, but we will continue to exploit it in the next tutorial. So I will just cut the tutorial here and we will continue from where we stopped right now, and I hope I see you there, and take care. Bye.